Pastor, I never believed you could be the one to do such a thing that was told of you. You have made me speechless. At the heart of the village stood the Church of Divine Mercy, its white walls peeling under the sun like old skin. To the people of Ngozi, the church was not just a building, it was the soul of their community, and its pastor, Chijioke, was their shepherd. Pastor Chijioke stood at the church doors every morning, his white robe glowing like moonlight against his dark skin. He greeted each villager by name, his voice booming with practiced warmth. "Sister Ada, how is your grandson's cough? Bring him to me, I'll pray the devil out of his lungs." The old woman bowed, clutching the yam he pressed into her hands. "Brother Tunde, your yam harvest blessed us all. God is good, eh?" The farmer grinned, pocketing the coins the pastor slipped him. To the villagers, Pastor Chijioke was Dibia Muo, the spiritual healer. But when the crowd dispersed and the church doors closed, his smile faded like smoke. His eyes, sharp and cold as broken glass, scanned the village square for shadows to hide in. Amina Jallo wiped sweat from her brow as she arranged groundnuts on her market stall. Her hands moved quickly, sorting the nuts into small pyramids, but her mind was far away. Her daughter, Zainab, sat cross-legged in the dirt nearby, stitching her ragdoll's torn arm with a rusty needle. The doll, named Camberley, had once belonged to Amina's late husband. He'd sewn it himself during the long nights before the fever stole him 2 years ago. Now, Camberley's button eyes were loose, her yarn hair frayed, but Zainab refused to let her go. "Mama," Zainab said suddenly, her voice soft as a moth's wing, "will I go to school tomorrow?" Amina's chest tightened. That morning, the head teacher, Mr. Ease, had pulled her aside. His voice was gentle but firm. "No fees, no desk. Even a child deserves dignity, sister." She'd sold 3 baskets of groundnuts that week, barely enough to buy a pencil, let alone pay tuition. She forced a smile. "Soon, Marka," she whispered, using the Igbo term of endearment her husband had once murmured to their daughter. "Mama will fix it." Zainab nodded and hummed a hymn she'd learned at church, her tiny voice blending with the market's chaos, the haggling of fishwives, the clang of blacksmiths shaping machetes, and the rhythmic thud-thud of women pounding yam in wooden mortars. Amina watched her, guilt gnawing at her ribs. 6 years old, and already the world is teaching her disappointment. Pastor Chijioke's shadow fell across Amina's stall that afternoon. He strolled through the market like a king, villagers parting for him as if he carried an invisible crown. His gaze lingered on Amina's face, and she bowed her head, suddenly aware of her faded headscarf and the sweat staining her blouse. "Sister Amina," he said, fingers brushing the silver cross around his neck. "You look weary. Let the Lord carry your burdens." "Thank you, Pastor," she replied, staring at the ground. "We manage." "Ah, but management is not grace," he said, picking up a groundnut and rolling it between his fingers. "Meet me after sunset. The church has work for willing hands." He left without another word, his robe sweeping dust from the ground. Amina's neighbor, Mama Nkechi, leaned over from her stall of dried peppers, her gold tooth glinting in the sun. "Careful, Noir," she muttered in Igbo. "Men of God are still men." Amina ignored her. That night, she kissed Zainab's forehead and walked to the church, her heart drumming a war song. The moon hung low, painting the village in shades of silver and blue. Crickets chirped in the bushes, and somewhere in the distance, a baby cried. The church loomed ahead, its wooden cross creaking in the wind. The pastor's office was cramped and dim, lit by a single kerosene lamp. Shelves groaned under the weight of Bibles, dusty hymn books, and a framed photo of Chijioke shaking hands with a Lagos politician. He gestured to a wooden chair, its legs wobbling on the uneven floor. "Sit, sister. God told me your troubles. Clean his house, sweep floors, wash windows, and I'll pay Zainab's fees." Amina's hands trembled. "Why me, Pastor?" "You're dutiful," he said, his eyes roaming her faded blouse. "A widow's heart is pure in God's sight." She hesitated. Outside, a gecko scurried up the wall, its tail twitching. The pastor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll do it," she whispered. 4 days, Amina scrubbed the church until her knees bruised and her palms blistered. She polished the brass cross until it shone like liquid gold, dusted pews carved with generations of prayers, and mopped floors stained with candle wax and tears. Pastor Chijioke watched her, his presence a shadow she couldn't shake. Once, he cornered her in the sacristy, his breath hot on her neck. "Your devotion pleases God," he murmured. "But what pleases me?" Amina ducked away, her pulse racing. That night, she bathed in the river, scrubbing her skin raw as Zainab played with Camberley on the bank. The doll's cracked button eye glinted in the moonlight. "Mama," Zainab said, tilting her head, "why does Pastor laugh so loud?" Amina froze. "His, joyful." Zainab frowned. "I don't like his eyes. They're cold, like the river in dry season." On the 7th day, the pastor ordered Amina to clean the altar after dusk. "The bishop visits tomorrow," he said, his voice smooth as palm oil. "Every speck must shine." Zainab trailed her to the church, clutching Camberley. "Stay outside," Amina warned. "Play quietly. Don't wander." The moon hung heavy as Amina polished the altar, her reflection warped in its gleaming surface. The pastor's footsteps echoed behind her. "You've been distant, sister," he said, locking the doors with a click that echoed like a gunshot. "Pastor, I need to check Zainab." "Silence," he hissed, backing her against the wall. His robe swallowed her like a storm. "You owe me gratitude." Outside, Zainab pressed Camberley to the stained glass, the doll's hidden recorder clicking on. She'd found the tiny device months ago in her uncle's workshop, a forgotten experiment tucked inside the doll's stuffing. Now, it hummed to life, capturing the thud of bodies, muffled cries, and the clink of a belt buckle. Zainab peered through a crack in the window, her breath fogging the glass. Moonlight sliced through the chapel, illuminating her mother's tear-streaked face and the pastor's snarling lips. Camberley slipped from her hands, the doll's button eye cracking against the ground. "Mama!" Zainab whimpered. A goat's sudden bleat startled her. She snatched Camberley and ran, her bare feet slapping the dirt. The doll's recorder buzzed faintly, its secrets buried in static. Amina returned home at midnight, her blouse torn, her spirit shattered. Zainab pretended to sleep, Camberley's broken eye staring at the ceiling. The next morning, the village buzzed with news. Pastor Chijioke had announced a miracle, a poor widow's faith healed her daughter's trouble. But as Zainab walked past the church, she hurled a rock at its walls. It struck the pastor's nameplate, leaving a dent no one noticed. That night, she pressed Camberley to her ear and heard whispers, click, thud, Mama's cry, a puzzle her 6-year-old mind couldn't solve. The village slept, unaware that the devil had worn a holy robe. And in the silence, a doll held the truth. The Harmattan winds blew dry and bitter through Ngozi, carrying red dust that coated the leaves of mango trees and settled on the tin roofs like powdered rust. Amina moved through her days like a ghost, her hands scrubbing clothes at the river or stirring pots of aguzi soup, but her eyes hollow and distant. Zainab clung to her mother's skirts, silent now, her laughter replaced by wary glances. The rag doll, Camberley, never left her arms, its cracked button eye staring accusingly at the world. Pastor Chijioke's miracles grew louder. He claimed to heal a boy's twisted leg during Sunday service, the child's mother weeping as the congregation clapped and shouted, "Hallelujah!" But Amina saw the boy limp home afterward, his face pinched with pain. The pastor's sermons thundered about the devil's lies and ungrateful hearts, his eyes darting to where Amina sat at the back of the church, Zainab's small hand trembling in hers. One afternoon, Amina's uncle, Bamideel, arrived unannounced. A broad-shouldered farmer with a beard like steel wool, he dropped a sack of yams at her doorstep and narrowed his eyes at her bruised wrist. "Who did this?" he growled, his voice rough as tree bark. Amina turned away, stirring the pot of soup until the wooden spoon trembled. "I fell, uncle." Bamideel snorted. "You lie like a crooked river. Where is Zainab?" The girl crept out from behind the hut, Camberley clutched to her chest. Bamideel knelt, his calloused hands gentle as he cupped her face. "What frightens you, little one?" Zainab pressed the doll to his ear. "Camberley knows." A faint, garbled whisper hissed from the doll's belly. "Silence, you fool," a man's voice, sharp and familiar. Bamideel stiffened. "Where did you hear this?" But Zainab buried her face in Amina's skirt, her silence thicker than the Harmattan dust. Mama Nkechi found Amina at the market the next day, her stall of dried peppers left unattended as she cornered her near the cassava grinder. "The pastor's houseboy told me something," she whispered, her gold tooth glinting. "Last week, Pastor burned papers in his yard, letters from a city called Port Harcourt. Women's names," he said. Amina's throat tightened. "Why tell me this?" Mama Nkechi leaned closer, the scent of camphor oil clinging to her skin. "Because you jump at shadows now, Noir. And shadows grow in silence." That night, Amina dreamt of her husband. They stood by the river where he'd taught her to cast fishing nets, his laughter warm as sunlight. "Speak, Amina," he urged, but when she opened her mouth, mud poured out, thick and choking. She woke to Zainab's whimpers, the girl clawing at her own throat in her sleep. Pastor Chijioke's paranoia festered. He padlocked the church office, shouting at children who played too close to the windows. During sermons, he raged about wicked tongues and the curse of Eve, his sweat soaking through his robe. After service, he cornered Amina near the baptismal font, his breath reeking of palm wine. "You've been quiet, sister," he hissed. "A wise choice. God hates a gossiping woman." Amina fled to the river, scrubbing her arms until they bled. Zainab followed, crouching in the reeds to dig for snails. When she held up a broken piece of mirror, a shard from some long-lost vanity, Amina glimpsed her reflection, a stranger with dead eyes. "Mama," Zainab said, tracing the crack in the glass, "the pastor's face is broken too." 3 days later, the village gathered for the festival of New Yam. Drums pounded as dancers swayed in masks carved to look like spirits, their bodies painted white and red. Pastor Chijioke blessed the yam mounds, his smile strained, while Chief Obi, the village head with a belly round as a cooking pot, watched from a plastic chair, sipping imported whiskey. Zainab wandered through the crowd, Camberley tucked under one arm. She paused near the pastor's house, where a group of boys kicked a deflated football. One boy, Emeka, pointed to her doll. "Why's it got one eye?" "She sees secrets," Zainab whispered. Emeka laughed. "Make it talk, then." Zainab squeezed Camberley's belly. Static crackled, then a voice. "You think God cares about your tears?" Rasped from the doll's hidden speaker. The boys froze. Emeka's eyes widened. That's the pastor." Zainab ran, her heart hammering, as the boys scattered like scared chickens. Uncle Bamideel found her hiding in his yam barn, knees curled to her chest. "Tell me what happened," he said, his voice softer now. Zainab unstitched Camberley's belly, revealing the tiny recorder wedged inside. "He hurt Mama," she whispered. "Camberley remembers." Bamideel played the recording, his face darkening with each muffled cry, each snarled threat. When it ended, he crushed a yam leaf in his fist, the juice staining his hand blood-red. "Stay here," he ordered, storming out with the recorder gripped like a weapon. The pastor was burning letters again when Bamideel kicked open his gate. Flames licked at a metal basin, devouring photographs and handwritten pages. "You!" Chijioke spat, ash clinging to his robe. "This is God's who." Bamideel shoved the recorder in his face. "Play it," he growled. "Play it for the whole village." The pastor's eyes darted to the half-burnt photo in the fire, a woman's face, her mouth a blackened hole. "Chief Obi will bury you," he hissed. "You think they'll believe a drunk farmer and a broken doll?" But Bamideel was already marching toward the village square, the recorder clutched tight. Behind him, Pastor Chijioke sagged against the wall, his hands shaking as he fumbled for the sniper bottle hidden in his desk. The village square buzzed like a stirred beehive. Women balancing baskets of cassava on their heads paused to gossip. Men squatting near the palm wine stall muttered into their cups. Uncle Bamideel stood atop the old well, the recorder raised high, his face carved from stone. Children clustered around Zainab, their fingers poking at Camberley's cracked eye. "Play it again," Emeka shouted, his voice cracking. Bamideel pressed the button. Static hissed, then the pastor's voice slithered out, "You think God cares about your tears," followed by Amina's choked sob. The crowd recoiled as if bitten. Mama Nkechi crossed herself, her lips moving in silent prayer. "Lies," a voice boomed. Chief Obi waddled forward, his gold-rimmed glasses glinting. "This toy is witchcraft." The pastor is a man of God. The crowd split like a felled tree. Some nodded, eyes darting to the church. Others glared at Amina, who stood frozen at the edge of the square, Zainab clinging to her legs. She's jealous, a fishwife spat. A widow scheming for money, but Mama Nkechi stepped forward, her spine straight as a spear. I've known Amina since she was a girl. She'd sooner swallow fire than lie. The argument raged until sunset, the recorder passing from hand to hand. When darkness fell, the villagers dispersed, but their whispers hung in the air like smoke. Amina sat by the river, her hands numb as she scrubbed Zainab's school dress. The girl splashed in the shallows, her laughter sharp and brittle. Mama, look. Zainab held up a frog, its throat pulsing. It sings like pastor. Amina's stomach turned. She grabbed Zainab's wrist, too hard. Never speak of him again, Zainab yelped, the frog leaping into the reeds. Amina pulled her close, trembling. I'm sorry, Marka. Mama's tired. Zainab pressed Camberley to Amina's cheek. The doll can fix it. She knows magic. That night, Chief Obi visited Amina's hut. He reeked of whiskey and sweat, his Rolex glinting in the kerosene light. Take this, he said, tossing a sack of naira onto the dirt floor. Forget the lies. The pastor's building a school, your girl can go free. Amina stared at the money, enough to feed them for a year. Zainab's future glimmered in the stack of bills. But then she saw it, the chief's thumbprint on the sack, stained red from chewing cola nuts. The same red that had marked the pastor's door after the last suicide in another town. Keep your blood money, she whispered. Chief Obi's smile vanished. You'll regret this, AGB. After he left, Amina buried the sack in the cassava field. The moon watched, silent. At dawn, the church bells rang a frantic, uneven clanging. Villagers stumbled from their huts, squinting at the steeple. Pastor Chijioke stood at the pulpit, his robe stained, his eyes wild. The devil tests us, he screamed, spittle flying. But I am clean, clean. Zainab hid behind Mama Nkechi's skirts, Camberley clutched tight. The doll's recorder buzzed faintly. Liar. Uncle Bamideel roared, storming down the aisle. Let the doll speak. The pastor lunged, knocking the recorder from his hands. It skidded across the floor, stopping at Zainab's feet. The crowd held its breath as she pressed the button. Silence. Then, you're nothing. No one will believe you. The pastor's own voice, twisted and cruel, echoed through the chapel. Women gasped. Men crossed themselves. Witchcraft. Chief Obi bellowed, but his hands shook. Pastor Chijioke staggered back, clutching his chest. God forgives, he rasped, before collapsing behind the altar. The villagers froze. Then, chaos, women wailing, men shouting, children crying. Uncle Bamideel rushed forward, rolling the pastor onto his back. His lips were blue, his breath reeking of bitter almonds. He's dead, someone screamed. Zainab crouched beside Amina, Camberley's recorder still humming. Is the devil gone, Mama? Amina didn't answer. She stared at the pastor's body, his eyes wide, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. By noon, the story spread, pastor dies of heart attack, Chief Obi declares. But Mama Nkechi found the sniper bottle hidden under the altar, its contents glistening like evil honey. Suicide, she whispered to Amina. The cowards escape. Amina said nothing. She walked to the river, Zainab trailing behind, and scrubbed her hands until the water turned murky. That evening, the women came. Mama Nkechi, the fishwives, even the pastor's timid housekeeper, they gathered at Amina's hut, bearing plantains, dried fish, and a new uniform for Zainab. We didn't know, the housekeeper mumbled, tears streaking her cheeks. He made me burn letters. Mama Nkechi gripped Amina's shoulders. You broke the silence, Noir. Now we rise. As the women sang an old Igbo hymn, Zainab placed Camberley on the firewood pile. The doll's recorder sparked, its secrets turning to ash. The village of Ngozi did not sleep the night Pastor Chijioke died. Fires burned in front yards as families huddled together, whispering of curses and judgment. Some said God's hand had struck him down. Others blamed Amina's witchcraft doll. By morning, The church's wooden doors were smeared with red palm oil, a warning to evil spirits. But the real evil lingered in the silence between neighbors, in the sideways glances, in the way mothers pulled their daughters closer when passing Amina's hut. Zainab no longer sang. She sat for hours by the river, poking sticks into the mud to build tiny walls around Camberley's grave, a mound of pebbles where she'd buried the doll's ashes. Amina watched her from a distance, her hands raw from scrubbing laundry she didn't need to clean. She'd stopped going to the market. Stopped eating. Stopped blinking, it seemed, her eyes dry and wide as the Harmattan sky. On the third day, Chief Obi came. He arrived at sunrise with 2 policemen from a nearby city, their uniforms starched and guns glinting. They kicked open Amina's hut door, the sound cracking through the village like a whip. "Where is it?" Chief Obi demanded, his jowls trembling. "The recorder. The lies you used to kill a holy man." Amina shielded Zainab with her body. "It's gone. Burned. Liar." He backhanded her, the gold rings on his fingers splitting her lip. Zainab screamed, scrambling under the bed. One policeman sighed, adjusting his hat. "Chief, this isn't the way." "Quiet." Chief Obi roared. "Tear this place apart." They overturned pots, shattered clay jars of rice, and ripped open Zainab's mattress. But they found nothing until Zainab lunged from under the bed, biting Chief Obi's hand. He howled, shaking her off. A folded drawing fluttered from her pocket. The policeman picked it up, a child's crayon sketch of a man in a robe, his mouth a jagged black hole, a green bottle dripping onto his head. "What's this?" the policeman asked, his voice softer. Zainab curled into a ball. "The bad man. He drank the poison." Chief Obi snatched the drawing, tearing it to shreds. "Nonsense. Arrest her. Arrest the witch and her demon child." But the policeman exchanged a look. "We'll need to investigate, Chief." "Investigate? I pay your salary." The argument spilled into the yard, drawing villagers from their huts. Mama Nkechi arrived first, her walking stick raised like a weapon. "Touch Amina again, and I'll feed your liver to the crows." Uncle Bamideel pushed through the crowd, his machete glinting. "The only demon here is you, Chief." The policeman hesitated, sensing the shift in the air. One knelt to Zainab. "Is it true? Did the pastor hurt your mama?" Zainab nodded, her tiny finger pointing to Chief Obi. "He gave the bad man money." "I saw." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mama Nkechi stepped forward. Last rainy season, Chief's pickup truck brought boxes to the pastor's house. Boxes that clicked like guns. "Lies." Chief Obi spat, but sweat glistened on his brow. The policeman stood, hand resting on his holster. "We'll need you to come to the station, Chief." "You fool. I own the station." But the villagers closed in, their silence now a growl. Chief Obi's bluster crumbled. He fled to his jeep, tires screeching as he sped away. The policeman left soon after, promising justice in voices that sounded like empty tins. The next morning, a stranger arrived. She drove a dust-covered sedan, her hair braided into a crown, her suit crisp despite the heat. A scar snaked down her neck, pale against her dark skin. She found Amina at the river, scrubbing blood from her torn blouse. "My name is Adesuwa," she said, kneeling beside her. "Chijioke Okeke raped me too. Years ago, in another city." Amina's hands stilled. "Why come now?" Adesuwa opened her briefcase, pulling out a photo, a younger Pastor Chijioke, his arm around a girl barely older than Zainab. "Because he's not the first. And Chief Obi isn't the last." Zainab crept from behind a mango tree, her eyes on Adesuwa's scar. "Did the bad man hurt you?" Adesuwa touched her neck. "A different bad man. But they're all the same snake, just different skins." By week's end, the village split like a cracked calabash. Women marched to Chief Obi's compound, hurling rocks at his windows. Men loyal to the pastor drank themselves numb, swearing vengeance. But in Amina's yard, a new sound rose, the hammering of nails, the sawing of wood. Adesuwa had hired carpenters from the city. "What is this?" Amina asked, watching a roof take shape. "A shelter," Adesuwa said. "For women and girls. Where they can learn, heal, and scream if they need to." Mama Nkechi donated her savings. Uncle Bamidele felled trees for timber. Even Emeka, the mute boy, brought nails he'd scavenged from the church's ruins. On the day the walls were finished, Amina approached the site. Zainab tugged her hand. "What's it called, Mama?" Adesuwa smiled. "The Camberley Center. 4 brave girls who speak when the world wants silence." That night, the women gathered. They brought lanterns, drums, and a clay pot painted with Zainab's drawings. Amina stood before them, Zainab asleep on her back. "We burn the past tonight," Adesuwa declared, holding up Pastor Chijioke's robe. The women spat on the fabric, tossed in dried herbs, and chanted old Igbo words. Mama Nkechi lit the match. Flames roared, painting the sky orange. Zainab woke, blinking at the fire. "Mama, look, Camberley's dancing." Amina squinted. For a moment, the smoke swirled into the shape of a girl, her arms wide, her mouth open in laughter. Then the wind shifted, and she was gone. The rains came late in Ngozi that year, but when they did, they fell heavy and warm, washing the red dust from the leaves and filling the river until it spilled its banks. The Camberley Center opened on a morning thick with the smell of wet earth and blooming frangipani. Women from nearby villages arrived on foot, balancing babies on their hips and bundles on their heads. They brought yams, baskets, and stories that had festered in silence for years. Adesuwa greeted them at the door, her scar glowing silver in the dawn light, while Amina stirred a pot of jollof rice large enough to feed the crowd. Zainab hovered near the new chalkboard, her fingers stained with ink from the textbooks she had helped unpack. The shelter hummed with voices. A young mother named Ifeinwa taught others to sew, her needle darting through fabric like a minnow. Mama Nkechi brewed bitterleaf tonic in the courtyard, claiming it cleared the poison of bad men. And in the shade of the mango tree, Adesuwa held court, her voice steady as she scribbled legal petitions. She promised, "We'll drag Chief Obi to court and every man who ever hid behind a title." But Chief Obi wasn't finished. On the 3rd night, his men came shadows with machetes and kerosene cans. They slit the throats of Uncle Bamidele's goats and left them bleeding on the shelter's steps. A note pinned to a carcass read, "Stop now, or the girl dies." Amina found Zainab trembling under her bed, Camberley's ashes clutched in her fist. She whispered, "Mama, the bad men are back." Adesuwa stormed into the room, her phone pressed to her ear. "Police won't come," she hissed. "Chief's bribes still hold." Amina stared at the blood on the steps, her fear hardening into something sharper. "Then we fight without them." The village woke to drums. Not the gentle talking drums of festivals, but a furious, pounding rhythm that shook the ground. Women emerged from huts, their wrappers tied tight, babies strapped to their backs. Men who had once sided with Chief Obi hesitated at their doors, silenced by the glare of their wives. Mama Nkechi led the march, her walking stick thumping like a war cry. Amina walked beside her, Zainab's hand in hers. Adesuwa followed, a folder of evidence clutched to her chest. They surrounded Chief Obi's compound, a fortress of concrete and iron gates. His guards lowered their guns, eyes wide at the sea of women, mothers, grandmothers, and girls with stones in their fists. "Come out, cockroach," Mama Nkechi shouted. Chief Obi appeared on his balcony, pajamas stained with palm wine. "You think this scares me? You're nothing." Adesuwa stepped forward, her voice cutting through the heat. "We have testimonies. Land deeds you stole. Receipts for the guns you sold to the pastor. The whole country will know your name." The crowd surged, rattling the gates. A stone flew, shattering a window. Chief Obi stumbled back, screaming for his guards, but they had vanished into the crowd. The trial lasted 3 days. Amina stood before the judge, Zainab's drawings in her hands, the pastor's green bottle, Chief Obi's gold rings, and the Camberley Center rising from ashes. She spoke softly, her voice carried by the courtroom fan. "They thought silence would bury us. But we became seeds instead." Chief Obi was sentenced to 20 years. As they led him away, he spat at Adesuwa. "You think you've won? Men like me always win." She smiled. "But women like us, we outlast." On the day of the verdict, the women of Ngozi planted a garden where the church once stood. Zainab pressed a handful of okra seeds into the soil, her tiny fingers patting the earth. "Grow strong," she whispered. "Like Mama." That night, they feasted. The Camberley Centre's courtyard shimmered with lanterns and laughter. Ife Inwa danced, her baby strapped to her back, while Uncle Bamidele played the Ogene bell, its chime bright as hope. Adesuwa sat beside Amina, peeling oranges. "What will you do now?" she asked. Amina watched Zainab chase fireflies with Emeka, the mute boy who had become her shadow. "Live," she said. "Just live." Years later, travelers passing through Ngozi would ask about the scarred woman who ran the shelter and the girl who taught school under the mango tree. They would hear tales of a wicked pastor, a cowardly chief, and a doll that spoke the truth. But the story always ended the same way, with the women laughing in the market, their voices rising like a chorus, and the old church bells, now rusted silent, remembered only by the wind. Thank you for watching up till this moment. It actually means a lot to us. Kindly support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, like the video, comment your view and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest story. This will help our growth and we really appreciate you for helping us grow. Thank you. See you in another video.